Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you part 2 of my March wrap-up, where I talk about all the other books that I read in the month of March. I'll leave a link to the first video down below if you want to check that out, and I'll also have content warnings in the description box down below if that is something you might want to check out. But without further ado, we got more books to talk about here, so let's get down to the rest of the books that I read in March. So the first 3 books I'm going to talk about are plays. So I read the Theban plays by Sophocles and I will tell you about them all. So the first play, I'm going to put different images on the screen because holding this binder up the whole time is going to be really distracting, even though it's a lovely cover. So the first play that I read was King Oedipus, and this one is about a king who is told that he has a certain prediction for his life and is trying his best to avoid it because it's not a particularly nice fate. I enjoyed this play. I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting to. I was reading it and I was thinking, this is all quite predictable. It's all turning out the way I expected it to, and if it's a fate play, you kind of get a prediction of what your life is going to be like, and then eventually it must follow that. So even the storyline itself is predictable, but then it kind of took a twist that included a lot more violence and a lot more intensity than I was expecting this really old play to give me, and I loved it. I loved that turn of something unexpected being added to the mix. I think it did a good job of discussing, like, what does it mean to make choices in life and fate, and can you defy your fate or not, and I thought all of that was handled very well. I will say the only thing I didn't particularly like about it was the chorus. I didn't find the chorus's lines to add anything to my experience. I know they're quite an iconic staple this era of plays, but I just didn't particularly like the chorus. Then I continued on to reading Oedipus at Colonus. This is the next one, and this was my least favourite play out of the trilogy of plays. I thought this one, which is following Oedipus as he kind of like wanders about in his exile and what happens with his daughter and the people who are trying to kind of support him, I thought it was a bit boring, to be honest. I just feel like it followed a very conventional storyline, and it was a bit more symbolic with some of its themes in a bit of an on-the-nose way, and nothing really surprised me, nothing really interested me. The writing style was good. I think with these kind of early plays you can see a lot of Shakespeare's inspiration for how he kind of words things, so at times I was finding those comparisons a bit fascinating as someone who likes to analyse and read, but otherwise I think this play didn't serve me much, and again I did not really like the chorus's lines. And then last but not least, I read Antigone. So Antigone was the reason why I picked up this trilogy of plays. I really wanted to finally read that play and finally see what it's all about, and Antigone is a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that has more elements to it than just Antigone's character. A lot of characters before tragic fates, and I think it's quite interesting to read the play and think about why Antigone was the one who got the titular name of the play. And I think that play did a very good job of discussing what it means when you're too prideful, what it means when you are too egotistical and can't see or take in advice, which again is a good theme that I still think resonates with contemporary audiences today. I loved Antigone as a character. I loved her determination and her confidence in what she wanted to do, and I thought some of the character interactions were very interesting in this, and how people changed their mind and didn't change their mind, and were stubborn and weren't stubborn. I just thought all of the character work and the plot and the storyline in this were very unpredictable but also very realistic, and I enjoyed all of it. My only complaint is that once again I don't think the chorus added anything to this. So for all of these plays I would have just taken out the chorus and been entirely happy, which I feel like is a bit blasphemous to say, but I really didn't like the chorus. I didn't think it added anything, and Antigone was a fairly wonderful play if that was deducted from it. So I had a very good time. I'm glad that I read these. I can see how they resonate in the way that we write and talk about theatre and plays in the contemporary setting. It gives me a bit of that backlog of knowledge, and they were a good time. They were surprisingly a good time. I finished reading Becky by Sarah May. This is an adult contemporary book where we are following Becky. She is someone who really wants to be a news journalist, and she will stop at nothing to get the scoop, to get the story, and to make her way up. And it's set a bit in the past, so you're seeing the journalist career path when women are not that predominant in there, and there are not that many women in the newspaper building. She's like the first one on her floor. There's not even a women's toilet, so it kind of It touches on quite a few things, and mostly we're following her life, and Becky is someone who will lie out of her teeth to get what she wants. So you get to see it in two timelines: the past, where we get to see what really happened to her as a child, and the present day when she's fighting for that job, she's hungering for it, she's clawing for it, she's molding herself into whatever she needs to be to get there and rise to the top. This is also a retelling of Vanity Fair, and I have to admit I have not read Vanity Fair. I liked this, and then I didn't like some elements of it, so I feel a bit mixed about it. What I liked about it was seeing Becky be so ruthless. I just love that Becky was like, I'm gonna get this job. No man can stop me. No barrier can hold me back. I will do what I need to do. That determination, admirable. I also really liked some of the commentary that's sprinkled about this in terms of what it's like to be a woman in a world, in a patriarchy, in a newsroom that is all catering to and all made for men and not for her, and how she shakes that up and does something different and kind of proves that women can be in that space, even though she shouldn't really need to, she shouldn't really need to have to. What I struggled with in this book is that I feel like I still didn't get enough of Becky's character, which is really interesting because this whole book is about Becky. This whole book is from Becky's perspective. All the flashbacks are telling us about Becky, but I didn't get a sense of how she changed as an adult. I got a sense of how she changed from a child to a teenager, but she does go through life. She does have relationships. She does interact with people, and I wanted to see more of how it changed and more of how it affected her to get to the choices that she makes at the ending, and I don't think I saw enough of that. You could argue with me and say that the book doesn't need to show enough of that for certain reasons, which would be a valid argument, but for me I just needed a bit more in that sense. I also think the way that we see this book, we kind of span through her whole lifetime in some sense. We do jump around timelines, but we do go to different parts of her lifetime. I really did not like how the jump cuts were done. I was so annoyed because especially in the second half of this book where Becky is older, it will jump after a significant happening has happened to later in time, and then in the later in time timeline it will use hindsight to show us the consequences of that big moment. And for me that just meant we had suspense in that part, in that section, all the way up until the big moment happens. The big moment happens and then bam, you don't get to experience it anymore. You go to the future and you see the aftermath in hindsight, but you're not there, you're not present with the character as the aftermath is being experienced. And I wanted to be there. I wanted to see the consequences of actions. I wanted to see how things would unravel. I wanted to be there in that moment rather than skip ahead to looking back on it and then moving on to the next thing. So for me the timeline jumps I think were my biggest issue, and I just wanted to spend more time with the character in those moments, getting the reactions, because I think that's where it shows how you grow and how you move forwards. And again, that was the other thing that I was missing from this book. It's a weird one. It's one that I might reread if I read Vanity Fair, because I feel like I could maybe get even more from the story if I'd read the original. Ooh! I'm excited to talk about the next book. So the next book I read was Promise Boys by Nick Brooks, and I am so happy because I found a young adult thriller that I can say I enjoyed, full stop. I enjoyed this. I thought it was a really good thriller, and it was so good. So in this one we're following these teenagers. It's a young adult book, and they go to this school called Promise, and Promise is super strict. They are regimented, but they're also known for taking in troubled teens and churning out really teenagers who can excel, teenagers who do well, teenagers that are really disciplined. And it's like, how can a school do that in certain ways? And a murder happens at the school, and 3 teenage black boys are blamed for this murder, and they are trying to clear their name. I loved a lot of things about this book. One of the main things I loved about it was the way that it was written. I really liked that you not only get the 3 boys' perspective, but you also get kind of news articles, you get to see bystanders' opinion, you get to see the aunt's opinion on what's happening, or the uncle's opinion on what's happening. So you get to see other people's perspective and opinions, and I think it added to the story just to have a bit of an outlook of the different ways in which people view these boys. And I think there can be a lot said about the way that different people perceived these black teenage boys who they are accusing of being murderers. I think this book does a good job of not only having a quite interesting and quite fun murder mystery at its core, but also talking about the ways in which the school system is not built for black boys. It's not built to help black boys excel. It's built to show them as trouble, to show them as troublemakers and limit what they can experience in their life based off of that. And it shows how there is racism in the school system, but also racism in the world at large. It talks about class. We've got a bit of a diverse experience between the boys. So one of the boys has like 2 parents living at home with him, and then the other boy is actually from Latin America originally, and he's like living with his grandmother. So you get like a wide range of experiences that these black boys are experiencing, and that's again nice to see that black people are not a monolith. They all come from different cultures and backgrounds and have different experiences, even though there is overlap. Another thing I really liked is that even though these 3 black boys are all being accused of murder, they all have people in their corner. And it's nice to sometimes read a book with a sense of community. I think The Hate You Give does this very well too, and Elizabeth Acevedo, where even though you're black and you might feel isolated and alone from the way that people treat you in many cases, this was showing how there is still community. Each of these boys had someone in their corner, or more than one person in their corner that they could rely on, that they could trust, and seeing those really close relationships in such a difficult and trying time for them was really lovely to see unfold, even if those relationships are not typical in the way that some of these relationships are often depicted in other books. As for the main event here, the mystery, this is why I often struggle with thrillers, young adult or adult. I find the mystery to either be an unsatisfying conclusion or a bit too wild and out there, but for this one it was perfect for me. I do think it was predictable after a certain point, and you knew who had done it, and it was just like, how are they going to prove who did it? I did not mind the fact that I found it a little bit predictable. I found the way that everything wrapped up incredibly satisfying, right on the money, and I did think it was a good ending. I think often those endings kind of have a bit of a scapegoaty route to them, and this one didn't. I just want to say Karen McManus could never, and this was really good, and this is the young adult thriller you should be reading. I read Skandar and the Unicorn Thief by A.F. Steadman. This is a fantasy book where some children who are lucky enough might bond with a unicorn, and if they do, they get this training, and the unicorns are supposed to be like competitive in like the unicorn equivalent to the Olympics and races and things like that. But when this young child who's always wanted that to happen, there's a mysterious rider who appears with a unicorn. This character wants to watch the world burn, and they seem to be causing a lot of havoc in the unicorn rider bonding world, but also in the everyday world. And our main character here bonds with a unicorn and shows a gift that is quite forbidden, and it's what happens when that happens. Now listen, I was skeptical of this book, okay? Unicorns, while they are wonderful magical creatures, unicorns in this capacity, I was skeptical. I was like, unicorns that bond with human, who empowers and things like that, no, it's going to be too much for me. But I had a blast while reading this magical middle grade fantasy book. I think it's nice to get those magical boarding school vibes in there. I think it did it very well. I liked the plot. In some ways it's a standard conventional plot for these kind of stories, but in some ways it was just a lot of fun. It had elements of a really close friendship group, and especially a friendship group where not all of them are easily identifiable as friends from the beginning, so they kind of have to work on that friendship, they kind of have to develop it. I liked our main character. I think he did a good job of being naive enough to be a believing child, but not naive enough to be annoying to an adult reader, and he also just makes a lot of choices that I really agreed with and thought were realistic. And I did like the unicorns. I think they did a very good job of showing how unicorns could actually be terrifying creatures instead of the like happy-go-lucky magical creatures that we often depict them as. They're strong, they have powers of their own, they have these like really pointy horns, and seeing the bond between the riders and the unicorns just was a very beautiful depiction to me, and it felt very natural. It didn't feel like, I don't know, animal cruelty or anything like that. It just felt like a very symbiotic, natural relationship. I think it had highs and lows and adventures and magical fun, and I like that it talked a bit about anxiety and talked a bit about what it's like when you have difficult times understanding your parents, or when your parent is not as loving of you as you'd like them to be. I think it touched on all of those things really, really well. When I went on Goodreads, I was surprised to see a lot of mediocre ratings for it, as people calling it a discount version of a certain book that people don't want to read anymore. And as someone who has read that series and didn't like it, I think this was a much better take on that kind of magical boarding school storyline, and actually one that did a better job with plot, did a better job with character development, and did a better job with representation too. So why? Why do we keep making that comparison? Why can't we let this book stand on its own and be praised for what it is? I will be reading the sequel, clearly. So I read the graphic novel Alison by Lizzy Stewart, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. So this is a graphic novel, and it's beautiful. It's about this woman who gets married quite young, and then she decides that she wants more to her life, and she slowly joins this art class and falls in love with making art. So it's about like this friendship that she makes with her friend, and like the relationships that she has with men, and what it's like just trying to be a woman breaking into the art world and into the art space throughout her years as she grows up from a young woman to a more elderly woman. The AIDS crisis also happens in the time period of this book, so that's quite woven in, and it's part of the storyline of her and losing friends and that grief and that emotional turmoil. I think the artwork in this is like not my favourite thing, but I really like what it did with the watercolour art in this, and it's kind of the black and white grey artwork, and it worked so well for what this story is and how she kind of gradually comes into her identity. In this beginning of the book, she feels quite boring, she feels quite everyday and grey, and she kind of gradually, as she gets older, comes into her own, learns what she wants, learns what she can be capable of asking for. And it was kind of a beautiful, quiet story in that sense. Not much more happens than her learning to live her life in the way that she wants, but that can be revolutionary in and of itself. I liked it, I enjoyed it, I don't think I would revisit it, and I don't know if I would keep it, but it was still a very lovely book. Yoga Manifesto by Nadia, Gilani, and I actually read this at a point when I really needed it. I've practiced yoga since, well, I was a teenager. I think I started in 2016, which means it's been 7 years of practicing yoga regularly. Wow. And lately it's been a bit of a dip for me in yoga. I've been enjoying working out a lot more than doing yoga, so then reading this kind of reawakened my feelings and concepts of yoga. It's a non-fiction book, and Nadia Gilani begins the book by telling you about her own story. She tells you about her life, her battle with alcoholism and addiction, and how yoga has been there on that journey with her every step of the way, and it's a grounding place for her, whether she's practicing yoga regularly in her everyday or whether she's not and she's thinking about wanting to practice yoga, and the grounding that yoga and movement can bring to her. She talks about what it was like to be a yoga teacher, the economical side of that, the social impact of being a woman with Indian, South Asian heritage who practices yoga, and it was just really good to see her story with it, because I think there's a depiction of yoga that we often get as a practice where you do movement, where you work out, and you just are only practicing yoga if you do those things. But yoga can be more than that. It can be a mindset, it can be deep breathing, it can be activism too, and she talks about that a lot. And then she goes into the more manifesto side of this book, where she's talking a bit about the history of yoga, so if you want to know more about the origins of that. And then she also talks about it in contemporary present day and the ways in which it's been refashioned. She talks about what it means when there are super expensive yoga classes that exclude a certain class and a certain ethnicity, where yoga probably belonged to those people initially. It talks about, yeah, what it means to be a yoga teacher and if it's realistic, and the commodification of yoga and how that has changed yoga itself. She talked about a lot of things to do with yoga, and I really loved when she talked about activism and the pandemic and how yoga helped people there, but also how yoga is more than just movements on a mat, and how yoga can be a lifestyle too. I appreciated everything that she delved into, the range of topics that she covers. She writes very clearly, it's easy to understand, it's easy to take in that information, and I learned new things. I did not agree with every single idea that she presented in this book. You do not need to. You can still read this book and learn a lot from it. And I think people sometimes think when people recommend a non-fiction book, they are recommending every single idea in that book. No, that is not what you're doing. You're recommending people read this book to learn and take away different things from it. And I think there's a lot that needs to be talked about in terms of the sexualization of yoga, the modernization of yoga, commodification, all of those implication words. And it was just something that helped me frame and understand my own position with yoga right now, and how much it's impacted my life, but also how much I still need to learn about it. I read a novel in in verse. I love a good novel in verse. This is a young adult contemporary novel in verse called Crossing the Line by Tia Fisher, and it was a really, really important one for me. It grew on me and I really, really liked it. So in this one, we're following Eric. Eric's our main character, and things quickly spiral for Eric. He starts secondary school with his best friend, and a series of things happen. His father dies. That's the primary thing where life starts to spiral out of control. His mum is trying to cope. He is trying to get through school where he is being bullied, and as money troubles kind of plague the house, things end up spiraling and Eric starts turning towards a different source of income, which may have to do with dealing and becoming part of a whole gang and falling into the spiral of gang culture. I really like this novel in verse because I really like the way that it played with shape and words and pace on this page. I think it did a good job of having the form of the poems reflect the emotions and story of what the main character is going through. I also think it very realistically, at least from my understanding, depicts what it can be like to spiral down into the world of dealing and gang crime as a young adult, trying to get by, trying to think about school, trying to think about blending in as a teenager, trying to think about what you could do to support people at home and try and make enough money to kind of contribute to that lifestyle. You can see the ways in which adults turn away and don't really pay attention to what's happening to their children, but you can also see the ways in which adults are also just trying to get by, trying to do their best, and it might not leave enough space to support a child in the way that they need to be done. I'm not just talking about parents here, I'm talking about teachers and other adults that Eric encounters in his life in this book. It talks about what it means to grow up as someone who's just a boy trying to navigate self-appearance and friendships, and that complication too, those elements are in there, and I think it did a good job of balancing all of that, talking about friendships, talking about the family life, and talking about the gang crime that he does fall into. A lot of this has to do also with county lines, which is something very specific which you can learn more about in this book if you don't know what that means. And I think it's one of those books that's really important. I never read a book as a child about gang crime and gang lifestyle and county lines, and it's scary how easy it can be to maybe even fall into that without fully acknowledging the range of things you're falling into. So reading something like this can open children's minds, but also give reference to what teenagers can do if they are stuck in a situation where they don't feel like they can escape, where they don't feel like they can talk to adults around them. I think this is a good resource for people to recognize their situation as a teenager reading, and to be able to communicate what they're going through and talk to other people, and that's why I find this book important. But even then, outside of it, this book is a good novel in verse. It's just a good contemporary read, and I would recommend it to people as something to read recreationally as well as it having a good impact socially. I hope that made sense. I thought it was a really good novel in verse. I read Milk by Alice Kinsella, and this is a memoir book which is talking about what it's like to be a mother in Ireland. So we're following this woman who has recently given birth, and it talks a bit about before she gives birth and what her situation was like, and then during the process of labour, and also during the process of being a new mum and what that meant to her, and then a little bit afterwards when she has a bit of a hindsight of looking back at what she didn't know before she became a mother, before the whole process started. And it's interesting reading this because the way I said it, it sounds like it goes from a little bit before the birth to a little bit after the birth. It doesn't. It jumps around, it jumps between those three things in a way that's very clear, so you always know at which point she's talking about, but it's in a way that kind of blends those things because it shows that motherhood is not a before, middle, after. It's a whole process for this woman's or this mother's, this parent's life. And I think it did a good job of showing some of the unexpected things. I learned a lot. I'm a woman, but I'm not a mother in any way, form, and will not be anytime soon, I don't think. So it was just interesting to me to kind of see about her experiences. And she talks about women. She talks about the way that women are often pigeonholed into certain roles. She talks about how mothers are largely invisible in literature and books in a non-fiction sense. You don't shouldn't read parenting books until you're becoming a parent yourself. It's not something that's marketed to people who are not parents, and I think that is very valid. I know I am not a parent reading this book, but that's just because of very specific interests I have. Sometimes it talked about Ireland specifically and what that experience is like as a woman who is a mother in Ireland, and it talks a bit about the history of mothers in Ireland, what women can and cannot do when they get pregnant in Ireland, and what that means. I really enjoyed that. I wish that there was more of that. I wish there was more of this interweaving of fact and history and her contemporary situation. It also largely talks about other things too, because it is a memoir. It talks about climate anxiety. It talks about witches and the ways that feminism and women were treated before, and it kind of jumps to a lot of subjects like environmentalism and all these really important things. But because of the fact that the timeline is not told linearly and is jumping around, and also the subject matter is kind of jumping around with it, I did feel a bit lost in this book. I wanted something more cohesive to hold on to. I do think it might have been easier if this was told in a linear way, so that when these other topics are introduced into this narrative and storyline, I'm not getting lost between the subject matter and where we are in terms of her motherhood journey. It would have made sometimes those new subjects coming in feel a little less random if things had a bit more of a cohesive structure to them for me. So while I did like this and I did learn from it, and I do think we need more books talking about mothers' experiences, I do think this one just didn't work for me because of the structural layout of it. So I want to talk about Ghosted by Emily Barr. This is a young adult thriller, but also it's got contemporary romance vibes to it, as you can see from the cover, but it's also a time loop story. So I love a good time loop. I love them. And in this one, a boy in history in the past goes missing. And in the contemporary day, this teenage girl finds out that she can see ghosts and she can talk to ghosts, and nobody else can see them and nobody else can interact with them. And she sees this young boy who disappears at a certain time of day, and she becomes quite interested in him, and then discovers that he went missing in his past timeline and he's a ghost now, so presumably he must have died, but he doesn't know what happens to him at a certain time of day when he disappears, and he doesn't know why he's still haunting the earth and what happens. So basically she tries her best to help him figure it out. I liked it. I liked it, and I didn't like some elements. What did I like about it? I really liked the time loop. I think it was a very good use of time loop. It felt very plausible as we get to see how the ghost's time loop experience happens. I think it was explained well. I really liked the concept. Very, very unique. I quite liked mystery up until the end. Once again, with my thrillers, I thought it was a very good mystery. The way it was constructed, the way they had to do the investigating is quite unique because of the fact that he's a ghost and she can examine and investigate certain things in her timeline, and he can only examine and investigate certain things in his. I really liked that. I did like our main character. It was so interesting. What I didn't like was the romantic element to it. I felt like the romance was so cringe, and I do read young adult contemporaries, so I read young adult romances all the time, but even compared to the best or the most standard young adult romance books, this was exceptionally cringe, and I think that had a lot to do with the ghost element to this. So I did not like the romance. I wish it had been eradicated from the storyline personally, and I also found the ending just to be a bit too neat for my liking. It was a bit too... It didn't only solve the issue of the murder, it solved a lot of the other issues that the characters are facing in the story in a way that just wrapped it up in a neat bow, and I don't believe that things could be that neat in the end, and I kind of wish it wasn't. I think it could have been a bit more jagged, it could have been a bit more, I don't know, untidy with its ending. So the ending just felt a little bit too neat and tidy for me, but it was still a satisfying enough ending. It did leave things open for a sequel. If there is another book in this series, I don't particularly think I would read it. Small Bodies of Water by Mingya Powles. This is an essay collection, and these essays all revolve around a body of water, whether that's a swimming pool, whether that's living in New Zealand and being on the coast. They're all to do with different bodies of water, and we're following Mingya Powles and her experiences around them. Mingya Powles is from New Zealand. She is white passing and she knows it, so she's kind of talking about some of her themes of identity and also themes of trauma around some things that she's been through and works through as someone who lived in a earthquake zone near a large body of water. She talks about her culture, her heritage and her background, and also just different experiences that she has in her life, and they're all wrapped up quite neatly into her essays and her talking about her identity and her experiences. I really liked it. I thought it was an easy read. I like the essays. I don't really have strong opinions. I don't have that much to say. I don't think these essays are going to stay with me in the long run, even though they seem like everything that I would tend to like talking about identity and the past and nature and how those all intertwine together. I think I took something from reading this, but it's not something that's going to last very long. That's all I really have to say, unfortunately. And then last but not least, I want to talk about The Last Tree by Luke Adam Hawker. So this is one of those like all age picture books, kind of like The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, and the illustrations in this are so gorgeous. They are so gorgeous. I'm going to try and show you some here and just flick through to another page. Oh, what one am I going to choose? I've got so many options. I want to choose one where you see her and her dad. Let's do that. There you go. Lovely. So this picture book was just such a joy to read. I had a brilliant like half an hour staring at each of the pages, very intricately drawn art, because I just wanted to take the time to appreciate the beauty of the artwork in this. But it also has a really lovely story. She lives in a world where trees no longer exist, and she goes to a museum with her class and she looks at a picture of the last tree, and then she climbs into that picture. And there are some like very inspiring and heartwarming lines similar to The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, where it's just something uplifting that you can take with you. It's got more narrative than that one, so it does have a concrete storyline that works all the way through. You could read this with a child, you could read it as an adult, and I think you'll be able to take something away from it. In some senses, it's uplifting, it's hopeful, it's about looking towards a brighter day, and it's got that environmental aspect to it too. It's really lovely, and I can see this being a really nice gift to give someone, but also a really nice gift to give yourself. There you have it. That's my thoughts and feelings on all the books that I read in the month of March. Please let me know in the comment section down below what is the next book that you plan on reading. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior by Sophocles. I read the Theban plays by Sophocles. I read the Theban plays by Sophocles. I read the Theban plays by Sophocles. I know I can say it separately. I just can't say it together. Okay. I read the Theban plays by